Good afternoon and happy Friday. I'm Mary Alice Parks, joined by my colleague John Parkinson, who covers the White House and Capitol Hill here at ABC. And it's a holiday weekend. It feels like that in town. Members of Congress have gone home, but it's been a tense week here in Washington. President Trump and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi have been tangling day in and day out, really trading barbs, John.
Yeah, this has really felt like a long week, I think, because it's been so intense. We've really not seen this sort of a showdown the last couple of months that the Democrats have been in the majority. It really started when Justin Amash over the weekend, last weekend, started calling for impeachment. He was the first Republican to make that call. And then that put a lot of pressure on Democrats. And on Tuesday, we saw all these Democrats start bleeding out and really the dam broke, and Nancy Pelosi was facing more and more calls for impeachment. And then that all led to these accusations of a cover-up and then this nasty back and forth between the president and the speaker.
And that back and forth has gone on even today as the president was headed out of town. He once again had some tough words. Let's listen to what he said just a few moments ago.
Mr. President, what do you hope to accomplish with your personal attacks on the speaker? You're saying she's lost it. You're saying she's...
This just shows how fake you and the news are. When you say a personal attack, did you hear what she said about me long before I went after her? Did you hear? She made horrible statements. She knows they're not true. She said terrible things. So I just responded in kind. Look, you think Nancy's the same as she was? She's not. Maybe we could all say that. But I think frankly, right now I'm only speaking for myself. I want to do what's good for the country. I think Nancy Pelosi is not helping this country. I think the Democrats are obstructionists. They're hurting our country very, very badly. We can pass so many different bills right now, but all they want to do is investigate because they failed with Robert Mueller and the Mueller report.
You get the sense there that he's really rattled. That's what everyone was talking about this week, that Nancy Pelosi seems to have gotten under his skin. But he's making a point that if they are at this level of dysfunction, they're not getting anything done. There are plenty of Democrats, too, on Capitol Hill that you talk to, I talk to, who don't want to go home and say they just gave up on infrastructure or prescription drugs or all these other pieces of legislation that they were hoping to pass, even with a divided government.
Yeah, I heard from a White House aide right after all the showdown kind of went down on Wednesday, and after the Democrats saw the president walk out of this meeting, and they said, who do you think actually won today? Do you think that it was the president or Democrats? And I think that this really just shows that divided government creates these sorts of problems, creates these showdowns, creates shutdowns on Capitol Hill when they have differences over government funding, when they have differences over immigration, when they have differences over these oversight investigations.
And you said that at the beginning of the week, Nancy Pelosi was really facing some restlessness in her caucus, growing calls for her to start some impeachment inquiry. I think there's just been a level of frustration that is starting to boil over as the administration stonewalls every single subpoena, says they're not going to let anyone come testify, they're not going to respond to the documents request. Is it your sense, John, too, that that's really hitting a breaking point for her?
Well, I think that Pelosi is really stressed that they've got some wins that they've put up on the board, right? We've seen a couple of court decisions come out in their favor that will force the president's hand on some of these financial records coming out eventually. And so she wants to stay the course, right? She's trying to keep her caucus in line. She had this emergency, high-stakes meeting on Wednesday morning before she had the president's meeting on infrastructure. And that's where this whole talk, like, let's all start hitting the talking point of cover-up, right? And we saw all these Democrats come out, and that was like the new word of the day. And Pelosi says, well, this is something I've been saying now for months, but really right now it's really starting to take hold.
Yeah, we heard the president there blaming Democrats for not wanting to come to the table, but we've heard the Democrats using the same lines against Republicans. Let's listen a little bit to what Nancy Pelosi had to say about the president yesterday.
But I can only think that he wasn't up to the task of figuring out the difficult choices of how to cover the cost of what the important infrastructure legislation that we had talked about 3 weeks before. I pray for the President of the United States. I wish that his family or his administration or his staff would have an intervention for the good of the country.
That the family would have an intervention for the good of the country. Those were strong words. Again, it seems like she's just needling him. I mean, I was struck, though, by the fact that the president tweeted out a pretty highly edited version of this press conference, kind of made fun of all of her small stumbles in her speech. There were other Republicans that were tweeting a really doctored version of the video altogether. That's, as a reporter, I have to say, John, that really makes me nervous when elected officials are willing to tweet out fake or altered or highly edited pieces of video. Especially worries me in a campaign cycle. It'd be so easy to see how that could spin absolutely out of control. Once you put something online, it can just spread like the wind. We actually have sound of Senator Marco Rubio from Florida talking about exactly this issue from a year ago. He said a year ago that he was worried about how politicians could really take advantage of how easy it is to make these highly edited videos. I'm struck by this sound from Republican Marco Rubio.
And imagine a compelling video like this produced on the eve of an election or a few days before a major public policy decision with a culture that's already has already a kind of a built-in bias towards believing outrageous things, a media that is quick to promulgate it and spread it, and of course the social media where you can't stop its spread. I believe that this is the next wave of attacks against America and Western democracies, is the ability to produce fake videos that can only be determined to be fake after extensive analytical analysis, and by then the election's over and millions of Americans have seen an image that they want to believe anyway because of their preconceived bias against that individual.
You know, I think I've covered Nancy Pelosi for 9 years up on Capitol Hill. And you take any one of these news conferences, they're over 20 minutes long. I think you can find 4 or 5 examples and string them together and make her look like she's stumbling through a news conference. But this can really be done with almost any politician that has to go out in front of cameras and speak on the fly, answer questions that they're not necessarily expecting. Some they will be prepared for. But I think that this is really, you know, a new low to kind of see this be edited and go viral. And everyone kind of suggested either on the slowed down video that she was drunk. Nancy Pelosi doesn't even drink alcohol. She's like the president, doesn't drink alcohol. So I think that, you know, you see these manipulated videos and it really gives you pause.
Yeah, well, I was struck too, and you know, Marco Rubio there was talking about the next level of an extreme that you could imagine some political group or some foreign adversary making an all-out fake video and how hard it would be in this day and age to detect that. But I want to bring in our colleague Alex Mallon, who covers the Justice Department, because we have a whole nother list of headlines outside of these. I mean, it's been a busy week before a holiday, Alex. You know, I was a little bit nervous reading this note from some of our own reporters here at ABC, again, ahead of a holiday weekend. This note that the FBI is tracking a much higher tempo of terrorism cases than they've seen in a long time. I mean, 5,000 open terrorism cases, 1,000 ISIS-related, but 1,000 cases where they're tracking the potential for homegrown violent extremists. I mean, shift turn to a dark look ahead to this weekend, but this is terrifying stuff.
Well, and this is something that the FBI sometimes occasionally does before holiday seasons, just to make sure that all Americans, you know, have raised awareness and, you know, just aren't letting these threats fall by the wayside. And it really is something that struck me from our colleague Pierre Thomas in this FBI briefing that he went to, was this emphasis on the flash to the bang going even quicker. This idea that officials who are investigating crimes or potential terrorism cases aren't able to track as effectively as they'd like, and especially in cases like social media. These people who are radicalized inside their homes, going on these message boards that are in the deep, dark web that we, you know, typically don't see associated with any of the social media followings that we're in touch with. So something that we've seen in a lot of recent terror cases are these people who are radicalized online, and I think that is really what is alarming all these FBI officials right now. Yeah, that is absolutely terrifying. And like you said, harder to track and maybe easier and quicker for them to get weapons, especially here in the United States. And then we're just going to keep taking through these Justice Department headlines. Another big one today, we're listening to some of that sound of the president leaving on his way to Japan. But this week there at that press conference and also earlier in the week, the president saying that he has greenlit the Attorney General Barr to start declassifying documents related to
those original investigations that became the Russia investigation, that became those longer-term investigations into Russian meddling. You know, and at first blush, I think it seems to someone like me, like this could be a really good thing for the country, right? Why wouldn't you want to understand why that investigation took place? What was the beginning? What was the initial evidence that led investigators down the path that they eventually went down? But obviously, Democrats on Capitol Hill are sounding an alarm because they don't trust the Attorney General Barr to do this fairly. What are you hearing from the Justice Department?
Well, this comes at the same time that the president is out there, especially on the South Lawn today, saying that there's an attempted coup, that this investigation that was launched into, largely it started among suspicions that Russia was meddling in the U.S. election, and then it looped in these Trump campaign officials in the July of the campaign. But basically, Republicans and the allies of the president himself have framed this as something nefarious, that the Obama administration was trying to illegally spy on the president's campaign. And so this directive from the president was an extraordinary move. This was his most significant way of getting directly involved in Barr's review of this investigation. And now I'll say that the White House statement on this last night called it Barr's investigation of the investigation. Now, the Department of Justice has been insistent that this is not a criminal investigation. This is merely a review. But at the same time, the Attorney General has been out there in interviews, seeming to stoke some of these suspicions that there might be something there. When
he used that word spying on Capitol Hill. Democrats didn't like that.
Yeah, and I think that has raised suspicions and allegations from Democrats that the Attorney General is using his office to act more like the president's personal lawyer. Now, whether he's going to find something, we really don't know. And I think that it's important to emphasize that traditionally, intelligence officials welcome this kind of scrutiny of their work. It's not done traditionally by the Attorney General himself. And this is an extraordinary power that is being thrust upon him by the president. The president has given him the power to declassify any materials relevant to his investigation that he sees fit and potentially make that public. And now Democrats are raising the alarm that what if he does this in order to politicize that for the president's benefit?
Yeah, and it's also interesting that Democrats have been asking for an unredacted or declassified version of the entire Mueller report for them to see. They haven't been granted that. Some of them have been granted that, but not as a full body there on Capitol Hill. But now the president's going to start declassifying some of these original pieces of evidence.
And previously, I mean, the intelligence communities last year, when the president was threatened to do this very thing, they pushed back. FBI Director Wray pushed back. Now you have the AG in the president's corner. So what does that change? Does that change the calculus of these intelligence agencies at all? Are they going to also push back against the Attorney General? And what will we kind of learn about this clash behind closed doors?
Okay, one more big talker out of the Justice Department this week. New indictments against Julian Assange. And I was up late last night talking to my friends and family about this because obviously Julian Assange is not seen as a sympathetic character in the United States. I think there's a lot of American journalists that wouldn't count him as a journalist. And yet, as journalists, I think a big freak out in the community, especially the community that's worried about the protection for First Amendment rights for publishers in this administration and in the country writ large. This was one of the first times that we've seen the government say they're willing to bring charges for publishing state secrets. I don't know. Thoughts, gentlemen?
I think, yesterday you saw the Justice Department brought these 17 additional charges, all under the Espionage Act, which there's been no instance where a journalist has ever been successfully prosecuted under the Espionage Act in U.S. history. So this does raise serious First Amendment concerns because that initial charge that was against Assange in April was only for computer intrusion. So it was an extraordinary step, and this is actually a step that the Obama administration was always careful not to take with Assange when they were considering whether and how to prosecute him for these WikiLeaks disclosures that he got from. I just think that it's an extraordinary kind of moment, and because you have, again, what you were saying, all of these people who are critical of the way that Assange did this, and potential danger that he put U.S. intelligence assets in, people that were like foreign spies abroad, and I think that it raises the question, who's going to run to his defense?
I think you touched on it. A lot of people want to know, is he considered a journalist? What does this mean for a precedent coming up against other journalists that are doing investigative work? They really want to know how the courts are going to interpret that. And, there's a case to be made that Julian Assange is not a journalist. So I think that, you know, as this plays out, a lot of people on Capitol Hill, when they want to get out classified information or whatever, they have the speech and debate protections on the floor, so they can go out and read something like the Pentagon Papers directly into the record and not fear any sort of judicial prosecution for that.
Yeah, I think we'll keep talking about this one in the months to come. I want to turn now to a new series that we're launching here on ABC News Live. We've been talking a lot about young voters who got out in record numbers in 2018. But what about new young candidates, millennials who ran? And actually, I mean, we're going to talk to someone who's 22. I don't think that counts as a millennial. That's like Gen X, super young. Young men and women who are so fed up or inspired by this moment in time that they want to get involved in government. Let's take a listen to this new piece that we have about a Connecticut state senator who's only 22 years old.
Hey everyone, this is Will Haskell. I have the honor of representing the 26th District in the Connecticut State Senate. That includes Westport, Connecticut, my hometown, as well as 6 other towns. I'm starting today, just like I start every day, with a really long drive. I love representing this community in Fairfield County, but it's a long way from Hartford. So I've got about an hour-and-a-half drive to the state capitol, where I'm going to start my day with a few committee meetings. I started my day here at the Capitol with an early morning meeting of the Higher Ed Committee. We were referred a bill that had to do with making sure students have access to internships. We considered that bill very quickly. Now I've got to head upstairs for some constituent meetings before we go over to the Senate for a vote. What we're doing right now is heading from the Legislative Office building, where my office is and where all the committees meet, where we have a lot of the legislative staff, over to the actual old Capitol building. It's a beautiful building. We head in here to vote as a full Senate or the full House. Hey guys, so this is where we all sit in the Senate chamber. We sit by district and not by party, which is pretty cool. It means you could be sitting next to a Republican or a Democrat. I'd sit next to the senator from the 27th district and the senator from the 25th district. The way you actually vote when a vote gets called is pretty cool and pretty old-fashioned. You open up this little box right here and you press either yay or nay. As soon as you do that, your vote appears on the board right up there, and everybody can see how you voted. So it's always a really interesting and dramatic scene in here. Even when we're doing run-of-the-mill bills, let alone when we're doing something really exciting and controversial, everybody watches the board to see how it breaks out. I absolutely love this chamber. It used to be the old library in the Connecticut State Capitol, so it's much quieter than the House. But let's go down to the House, so I'll show you what it's like down there. This is the House chamber. As you can tell, it's a lot busier and a lot louder in here. The Senate's a much quieter place, but the House is interesting because all the negotiations happen at the same time as the votes. It seems to be, I've never served in the House of Representatives, but it seems to be a really chaotic scene with a lot of excitement going on. I'm about to bring out my very first bill. This happens when you're the chairman of a committee. You bring out a bill, you talk to your colleagues about why it's really important, you answer any questions that they have, and you ask for their vote. I've never done this before, but I'm starting with an issue that's really important to me and so many other people across Connecticut, especially young people on college campuses. The bill is SB 750, an act concerning mental illness on college campuses. We know that there is an epidemic of mental illness, especially among young people. We, as public policymakers, too often overlook the mental health crisis that exists among young people. We know that 75% of chronic mental illness develops by the age of 24. It was a really successful day in the Senate chamber today. I was nervous to bring out my very first bills, but they all passed. Bringing that perspective of the next generation is absolutely crucial. That's a big part of why I decided to run for office. Look, when I look around the room, like I did today in that Senate chamber, I'm the youngest one in there by a good amount. But that shouldn't be the case, because we need every single generation to have a seat at the table to address the really serious policy concerns.
So we're joined now by Will Haskell in Connecticut. Will, why did you decide to run?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I was really inspired by President Obama's farewell speech, in which he said, if you're disappointed in your elected officials, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, and run for office yourself. So I took him up on it. That's what I decided to do.
And what's it been like so far? I mean, do you get strange looks in the hall?
It's definitely been a whirlwind. I'm certainly confused for an intern multiple times a week, but I'll tell you, it's already been so rewarding, and I'm only a few months into my first term. You know, the exciting thing is I knocked on 4,000 doors. I had 142 meet and greets, and in doing that, I really got to know not only the values of my community, but also some great ideas that they have in terms of how we can improve Connecticut. Now I get to play a part in turning those ideas into a reality. So I'm learning a lot, but I am just so grateful to have this opportunity to represent my hometown up in Hartford.
You know, Will, this is John, one thing that struck me watching your video and everything is you're shooting your own selfies. Right now it looks like you're shooting your own interview. This really reminds me of like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You know, do any of the younger members that are up on Capitol Hill, have any of them had any sort of influence on how you use social media and how you interact with your constituents?
You know, I learn every day from my colleagues who are older and who have been there for a long time. Some of them have been there longer than I've been alive. But one thing that I get to bring into our caucus room is a knowledge of how to reach the next generation. Door knocking is great. Making phone calls is great. But that's how you reach, frankly, some of our older constituents. And in order to actually be in contact with the next generation of voters who are going to be impacted by these policies, maybe more than anybody else, we've got to meet them where they are, and that's on their iPhones. So I post on Instagram every single day. I post on Twitter every single day. I really try to give people a picture into what it's actually like to be in the state legislature. And I ask for ideas. I ask for feedback all the time. It's been a really useful tool, frankly.
Will, Alex Mallon here. I'm just wondering, you're new to politics. What is your advice, the best piece of advice that you have for the, other young people who are interested in getting involved in politics but see it as too daunting of a task, see the idea of having to fundraise and they're kind of discouraged by getting in?
So first and foremost, we need public financing. In Connecticut, I'm lucky to live in a state that has public financing. I only had to spend 2 weeks asking people for checks, and then I got to ask people for money. And until we have holistic campaign finance reform to get money out of politics, young people aren't going to be able to afford to run for office. But the overarching thing that I would say is, one thing I figured out, and it took me about 1,000 doors before I actually recognized this: youth is an asset, not a liability. Just because you don't have 20 years of government experience doesn't mean that you don't bring a valuable perspective. People who are growing up now are a part, sadly, of the school shooting generation. We know what it's like to hear a loud noise in the hallway and look around the classroom wondering where we would hide in the event of a school shooting. We are a generation unlike any other that's been saddled by student debt. And that's especially true here in Connecticut, where we have the third highest student debt in the country. So we bring a very unique perspective, and I think it's important to have that voice at the table. So young people ought to really start demanding a seat at the table as we craft public policy.
Well, Will Haskell, the youngest state senator in Connecticut, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So it's a holiday weekend, which means that the campaign is in full swing. Once again, we have 23 candidates, and I think half of them are holding events around Memorial Day weekend. We're joined by Beatrice Peterson, who's up in New Hampshire with Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Beatrice, are you there? What's he have on the docket for this weekend?
He has 4 events in New Hampshire, 2 events today, including a roundtable tonight with veterans and a event tomorrow morning, a breakfast event, a little different than normal, breakfast with Mayor Pete, and another afternoon event, and that's what he has scheduled for New Hampshire. He will be going back to South Bend sometime this weekend to celebrate Memorial Day.
What are you planning to ask him about?
Well, there's a lot of topics out there. He had a very interesting town hall event yesterday where he talked about a lot of different issues. Bone spurs was an issue that came up. We wrote about it yesterday for ABC News Live. I plan on asking some veterans questions. What is his plans for treating PTSD and other issues facing veterans in the U.S.?
Hey, Beatrice, it's John. I just wanted to ask you, we just got off with a state senator that's only 22 years old. What do people up there in New Hampshire think about Pete Buttigieg and his age?
Well, people are interested. I mean, I will say this, in New Hampshire, they take this very serious. They're going to a lot of events, getting to know the candidates one-on-one, at each event that they can go to. I think the field is so wide right now. Some people have decided that Mayor Pete is their candidate. Some people are still waiting to decide. So it's very interesting to see the dynamics of the New Hampshire voters and what they're looking for.
Beatrice, can you just give us a sense, kind of outside the Washington bubble, the voters that you're speaking to on the ground there, you said that some of them haven't made up their minds. What are the key issues that they really think they want the candidates to hone in on and help them make their final decision?
Well, I think right now it's so early. A lot of people are still getting to know who the candidates are. They want to know what are their values when it comes to education is something that's come up a number of times. What are their plans for the economy and jobs? So it's a wide range, but right now people are still just getting to know the candidate. So it's very early right now, but we'll see tomorrow at a lot of the events and today and listen and see what they're talking about.
All right, Beatrice, you'll have to let us know how the events go up there in New Hampshire. We'll be tracking other events in Iowa and around the country all weekend. Like I said, candidates are barnstorming the country. The senators, when they know they have a week off, they're like, now it's time to hit the trail. Beatrice, thank you so much. So it is Memorial Day weekend, and here in D.C. on the National Mall, a really gorgeous memorial that is set up with poppy flowers, a poppy wall in honor of all the American service members killed since World War I. 645,000 poppy flowers, in fact. It's just stunning. If you are one of our viewers that is here in D.C., go take a look. And there's a pretty incredible live picture that's available online. And we talked to a veteran who was there visiting and paying tribute earlier this week.
This Memorial Day, remembering people like Eliseo Gonzalez, my grandfather, remembering him, and other friends of mine, Pedro Munoz, who was killed in Afghanistan. And to me, Pedro, he served very honorably with me in Colombia, South America, and he went over to Afghanistan to continue to serve. And unfortunately, he was killed in action in Afghanistan. And for me, that's one of the persons that I'll be remembering. This memorial. There's great memories of, for example, showing up at the flight terminal, getting ready to go on a mission, and Pedro always had a smile and a coffee ready, and it was always great, And he was always smiling and always positive energy, and so that was, to me, was one of the great things about remembering him. It was just, no matter how much we thought things were going to happen, he always had a smile on his face, and so we always need to keep going.
And that veteran there, I think, reminding us an important lesson that the best way to honor those fallen veterans is to keep talking about them, tell their stories, kind of keep them alive in our memory. And on a lighter note, but still really exciting, earlier today, the newest commissioned officers at West Point celebrated. They are no longer, at the Naval Academy. And the Naval Academy look at them. They are no longer cadets, but new members of the officer corps there at West Point. They graduated today, and I think we have video of them making it official. Oh, I love that. I love that. Iconic footage. Team, happy Memorial Day weekend.
Happy Memorial Day, yeah.
Happy Memorial Day.
All right, I'm Mary Alice Parks with John Parkinson and Alex Mallon. These guys here helping me bring you the briefing room today. We'll be back next week. Have a great holiday weekend.